Hi there, I'm Rick Partlow. Welcome back to How to Write Science Fiction That Doesn't Suck. It has been a while, like 3 months, and I'm very sorry that it's taken that long for me to get back to this channel. Um, as I said before, I've got lots of deadlines, uh, and I have the other podcast that I'm doing, the Military Science Fiction Podcast, so that takes up some of my time. And on top of that, I've had some medical problems. And of course, family always comes first. So the main problem, though, hasn't been like time to record as much as it has been time to come up with ideas to record about. And I've been kind of thinking of it in the back of my mind. And today, I wanted to deal mostly with tropes. So that's what we're going to talk about. Before I do that, I want to update anybody who cares. I have been working on a new series. I'm about halfway through book 3 in it. It's called Accidental Astronaut, and it's out through Variant with J.N. Chaney, and I'm really excited about it. I've also just recently completed book 5 in my Archangel series with Athon. Archangel did really well in books 1 through 3. Book 4 kind of fell off. So book 5 might be it. I mean, if people like book 5 and they buy it, I'll write a book 6. But right now, it feels like people just dropped off at book 4. And I'm not sure why, because they seem to enjoy books 1 through 3. That's just something that happens. And it's another thing I want to talk about today. Before we get into tropes, I want to talk about the market. And I know that I have, in the past, hesitated to speak of the finances and the business side of writing because I'm not an expert at it. I'm not. If I were an expert at marketing, I would still be publishing my books myself, and I am not. So I leave that to the professionals. But I can tell you a few trends that have happened recently. It is getting, sad to say, more and more difficult for newcomers to break into the field. And it is getting, very sad to say, hard to succeed at all in military science fiction or space opera. It's just been, there's been a downturn in readership. Don't know why. Maybe it's the old saw about, when in peacetime people want to read about war and in wartime people don't want to read about war. Not that we're definitively at war ourselves, but there's been a lot of war going on. So maybe that has killed people's appetite for military science fiction. Not sure. It's also possible that simply the generation that went to war is moving on and doesn't want to read about it anymore. That's possible too. Or maybe I just suck. No, it's not just me. Been a lot of people who've had trouble selling their books lately. So if you're getting into this, I'm not telling you not to write. I'm just telling you manage your expectations because it is not an easy time to get into writing science fiction in general or military science fiction in particular. Okay. As for me, I've had a hard time writing because I had surgery right there, as you can see from the scar. Get a little closer. A couple of months ago, starting to build the strength back up in my arm. It's hard. It's hard to keep writing when your arm hurts, when holding it in the same position to write. Even though the doctor says you can write, holding in that same position hurts. God bless my wife, who, in the worst of it, took dictation and typed for me while I narrated for her, which, I've said that I have problems with dictating, but it's easier dictating when there's a person there, because if you make a mistake, you can just say, oh, no, take that out, backspace to this word, okay, and write this instead. And that's a lot easier than having to figure out how to use a program and give it the right command every single time. And like I said, I really appreciate my wife doing that, and she has the patience of a saint because I require it. Anything else going on? My daughter's in law school. My son is overseas with his National Guard unit. Worry about him sometimes, but we hear from him. It's not like when I was in the Army and just being in training meant you really didn't talk to anybody. They have the internet over there thanks to Starlink, and they get to talk. They get to talk to their relatives, their loved ones. He gets to talk to his wife. So, what I was going to talk about today was tropes. Trope is kind of a dirty word with some people. People hear tropes and they say, I don't want to make my story cliche-ridden. But tropes aren't cliches. Cliches are things that are predictable. You start reading the story, this happens, you're like, oh man, I could have seen that coming. Trope is things that the audience expects and wants to happen. It's the difference between a story that's predictable in a bad way and one that's predictable in a good way. It's hard to quantify that. It's hard to say this is a trope and this is a cliche. But if you're writing a military science fiction story about space marines or any other infantry style military unit, it's expected you're going to have a gruff platoon sergeant, one that everybody's afraid of, or a gruff first sergeant, and you're going to have a wise captain and a lieutenant that's either, sometimes lieutenants are idiots and sometimes they're well-meaning and willing to learn, but they're always going to be young. And there's a reason for these tropes, and there's a reason that we write them is because people expect them. And if you don't write those tropes, it's not that you have to, but you better show a reason why you didn't. When I wrote the Recon series, when I first wrote it, the first book, originally titled A War to the Knife, now it's just called Recon, because Athon reissued the books and had to rename them. It's a story about a Marine recruit in Force Recon, and it does not have a basic training sequence. And people commented about that in their reviews, saying, this doesn't have a basic training sequence. And some of them were ticked off that it didn't, and some of them were like, oh, it's kind of refreshing that it skipped over that part. But people expected it. So if you are going to write, for example, your Starship Troopers-esque Marine or infantry battlesuit, trooper, if you don't have a basic training sequence, then you better have a reason why you don't. Maybe you're starting with somebody who's already experienced, and that's the reason. And even then, they might have a training sequence for them in the particular suit. Training sequences are a trope that people expect to find, and they miss when it's not there. That's just one example. There's plenty of others. But my point is not to list the tropes. My point is to speak to you about how to use them. Because there are two ways to use tropes, and the way you use them speaks more to whether they're cliches or not. When I was writing Drop Trooper, I didn't want to write a cliche-ridden story, but I knew that to gain audience, I had to use tropes. So my solution was, I'm going to write the story that I want to write, the one that I want to tell. And I'm going to put the tropes in there as supports beams for the story. They're not the main beams like, in a house or a building. They're not the ones that support the roof, but they're the ones on the side that strengthen it. And that's the way I feel like any good writer is going to use tropes in a story that kind of demands tropes, like Space Marine. You have to figure out a way to include those tropes in a way that supports the story you want to tell. For instance, in Drop Trooper, since I brought it up, I wanted to tell the story of this kid who had nobody, had no family, no friends, no support network, gaining a family. So, in any realistic military unit, your platoon sergeant, your platoon leader, your company commander, your company first sergeant, those are going to be authority figures you look up to, hopefully, either that or you resent. But either way, they're kind of like, the authority figures in your family, the mother, the father. And I knew that if I used the tropes of the grumpy first sergeant and the godlike company commander, that it would be like a support beam for the story of him finding a family. He's not just finding friends and brothers and sisters, and eventually, a soulmate. He's also finding a father figure and a mother figure. People who are, and in Scotty, if you remember Scott from the books, a big brother. So it worked in the story I was telling, but it was also a useful trope that would keep people who have expectations for military science fiction, keep them engaged. And you can do that with yours. And that's another area we can explore here, is that if you're writing a series that's successful and your publisher says, I want you to write more of this series, and you're like, well, I wanted to write this other series that involved these themes that, I wanted to explore with those, with that series, with those characters, you can incorporate that into your series. I mean, if you're writing a series about certain characters, those characters are going to be the device you use to tell the story, but the themes you use can apply to any story you're telling. I had ideas of writing a book that involved traveling across the galaxy, being stranded there, having to deal with all these trials and travails to get back. And Drop Trooper was doing so well, and I'm like, I'm just going to write this into Drop Trooper. And as the series evolved, the tropes evolved too, that people expected. When you're dealing with a recruit, in a story like in the first book, and to some extent the second and third, you have to have training sequences. You have to have obstacles for them to overcome. You have to have supportive teachers. You have to have teachers who are getting in the way, who are an enemy, an antagonist. You have to fit all that in. Once the character gets more established, if it's a military science fiction novel, if they gain rank and gain responsibility, then the tropes are going to change. Instead of them going through training, now they're going to be learning from experience. They're going to be training others. They're going to be leading others, gaining responsibility and feeling the weight on their shoulders. Those are different tropes, and people are going to expect them if you write a military science fiction novel and have your character go through that kind of advancement, which usually that only happens after you get several books in. So if you're at that point, congratulations, because you've written something that people want to read. So, and there's other tropes in other genres, like if you're writing a space opera, there's going to be, a snarky character, whether it's the main character or a sidekick. There's going to be an alien. There's going to be a love interest. It's all the tropes that you'd expect from a space opera. But, I've written several space operas, and I wrote the Taken to the Stars series and now the Accidental Astronaut series, and they both have those elements to them, but they're handled in very different ways. You wouldn't read each book and say, oh, this is a carbon copy of the other. They're handled differently. So you can include tropes without being repetitive, without being unoriginal. So don't be afraid of the tropes inherent in your genre or subgenre, because they're there for a reason, and they can be a good thing. They can help you to support sections of your novel that need it. So I just wanted to deal with that because I talked to someone about tropes and the difference between tropes and cliches, and the difference is how you handle it. A cliche is the same thing as a trope, but handled poorly, I guess would be my bottom line. If you have a hero who is self-sacrificing and noble and always does the right thing, that can be either a trope or a cliche, depending on how well you've written the character. So, yeah, it's not a huge subject, but it's one that I talk to people about. So I wanted to share that with you. And since I wanted to put something online, that's what I'm putting online. Aside from that, like I said, I'm working on Accidental Astronaut 3, which is my 87th novel. I have Archangel Book 5 coming out in January. Accidental Astronaut 1 came out just a few days ago, and 2 will come out in February. So I hope that you guys have gotten something out of this. It's kind of short, but I really wanted to check back in. And if you have any ideas for shows, take a look at the ones I've already recorded. And if you see, hey, I see something, there's something I want to talk about that I don't see in those shows, just email me at dutyhonorplanet487@gmail.com. Or you can get me on Facebook at the Science Fiction Worlds of Rick Partlow. Just message me and say, hey, I'd like to see this addressed in one of your recordings, and I'll do it. I mean, like I said, I have the time to record. I just lack the time to sit there and come up with new ideas to record. So I hope this has been some use to you, and I will see you next time.